Hey guys, welcome to a mid-week video, the first one of the year. I honestly don't know if I'm back to posting twice a week or if this is kind of like a one-off thing. I do know you will have a mid-week video next week from me, and we'll see. Honestly, I'm trying to take this year slow, go deep, but also I really like showing up here on BookTube. I love the community, love you guys, and love talking about books, so it's hard for me to stay away. Today, I thought I would kind of continue chatting about classics because that is part of my slow and deep this year. I want to be reading more classics. Since I shared a video a couple weeks ago sharing some tips on how to read more classics and to understand them better, one of the things I shared was short classics. Read short ones because it's easy to check a box. And I gave out a couple of recommendations there. But I have a whole stack of recommendations right now, which reminds me I actually forgot one on my cart. I'm gonna grab it. To be honest, this stack has fallen over off my bed twice already, and it almost did again. They are definitely gonna be in no particular order because I've just picked them up and thrown them on a pile. A couple things going into this. I am not including any short stories. I feel like that may be a whole video on its own. Classic short stories, I love them, but I'm keeping them off of this list. I am also not including any children's classics. Once again, could be an entire video, maybe one coming up. And I did not include any detective fiction, so I'm thinking like Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Josephine Tey. Like there's quite a few, but I feel like that could also be its own video. So other than that, I decided to make this video just sharing books that I physically own because it could be a really long video otherwise. It could be a lot of recommendations. I may do another one in the future, but just thought I would stick with physical books that I have on my shelves. I'm mostly going to be sharing books that I have read, and then I'm going to share a couple that I have on my shelf that I have not read. So those ones aren't exactly recommendations, but lots of good stuff here. I think I've enjoyed, for the most part, all of these. Some of them maybe I've enjoyed just to finally understand kind of what this book that I've heard things about is actually about. Some of them I've like really loved, and yeah, I'm just excited to share them with you. Even if you don't love the book, it can still be nice to check off a classic, and short books is an easy way to do so. We are gonna start with one that was surprising to me. I loved it. I flew through it. Should reread it. 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. So these are true letters. It's a 20-year correspondence between an American writer and a British bookseller. And this has the makings of being a really great premise for a book. I don't know if anyone has ever taken this and turned it into a fictionalized thing. That would be so cool. But we follow Helene Hanff as she corresponds, starts in World War II, I think. And when does it actually start? Yeah, 1949. She writes to a bookshop in London for some reason. Oh, because they are specialized in out-of-print books, and she wanted one or some sent to her. And then it ends up being this actual correspondence between her and this guy that owns, I don't think he owns it. He works for the bookstore, and over time she actually corresponds with some other people, and it's just fascinating. Super short, but it's a lovely book. And if you have not read it yet, I would highly recommend that you do so. I mean, depending what your definition of a classic is, it's not 100 years old yet. It was first published in 1970, but the letters go back to 49, but it reads just like a sweet classic, so definitely recommend that. This next one is not a favorite of mine, but it is short. Had to read it in school. That is Animal Farm by George Orwell. Super short. This book is tiny and it's under 100 pages. My 11-year-old has actually really enjoyed this book. I think most people know it is a commentary on what exactly? Society, and all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. This has actually brought up some really good discussions in our home. My 11-year-old he has read the graphic novel version, which honestly I think is a little better, but you should still read this and check it off. And we've had really good conversations about what all goes on in this story. I know some people love it. I'm just not in that category. Okay, my next one is Deceiving, because it is just in this bind up, and that is Lady Susan by Jane Austen. I have been raving about this book ever since I read it last month. It is 60 pages of letters between Lady Susan and other people in her life. And Lady Susan is a terrible woman. She's just so horrible. She was so much fun to hate on. And it was just a surprising thing, because I've read Jane Austen's regular, more well-known, larger works, but that was my first time experiencing one of her shorter works, and I plan on reading The Watsons yet this month as well, which is also short. Highly recommend hanging out with Lady Susan and hating on her a little bit. I have this cool vintage edition of The Call of the Wild by Jack London? Why am I blanking? Jack London, okay. Bob McDonald had this book in 1950 to 1951. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so this is the story about a dog. And I read this when I was running a classics book club. It's a bit hard of a book to read, but I think it's really well done. I think most people have either like watched some kind of movie adaptation or know the general story already. But I would recommend reading that. I mean, I would recommend them all. A light, fun one after The Call of the Wild, Daddy Longlegs. I mentioned this one in my classic how to read and understand classic books. And one of the fun things about it is there is lots of illustrations throughout. So this is also letters between a girl named Jerusha, she goes by Judy, and this man she does not know, who is sponsoring her to go to college. So she grew up in an orphanage and she has been sponsored. The only caveat is she's supposed to write him, I think, every month. And she's just dying not knowing who this man is. And so she makes things up and she draws funny pictures, and it's just a lovely story. I feel like this one, even though I've been talking about it like a lot since I read it a couple years ago, I feel like it's still undervalued and underread, so please read it. A newer classic that I read last year, maybe the year before, that I've always heard good things about but never took time to read is The Outsiders. This book kind of broke me. So we follow a boy named Ponyboy. His parents gave their kids very strange names, and he is kind of a younger member of a gang. Him and his older brothers are living on their own. Their parents died a few years before, and there's really two gangs that are fighting against each other. And yeah, I had no idea. Like, I knew the general gist of this when I was teaching. I had to work in a classroom one day and worked with a boy like on a chapter in the middle of the book. So I had like a general idea, but was very confused. Had no idea where it was gonna go. Was shocked and really touched by the book. So really good one. Also, you know, super short, easy to check off. A classic that everybody has heard about is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I first read this in university and I didn't even hate it then when I had to read books and usually did hate them. So I feel like, you know, it's not too bad then. We follow Dr. Frankenstein as he creates this monster that we now in society call the monster Frankenstein, even though it's actually the doctor, although the doctor is kind of a monster too, but you know, you get it. She was only 18 when she began the book, and I think that S.E. Hinton was like 14 or 15 when she wrote this. So we've got some young authors here. This is definitely one I have on my want to reread list, hopefully this October. I feel like that's the perfect time to read it. So if you haven't read that, I would recommend doing so in the fall. Okay, a favorite Gothic author of mine is Shirley Jackson, and this one is We Have Always Lived in the Castle. She really writes that eerie Gothic vibe really well. I love her short story, The Lottery. That was kind of my first introduction to her in high school. Still love that. I reread that like every couple years and it still hits me. But We Have Always Lived in the Castle. We have two sisters that their whole family died from a poisoning years before. And these two sisters are looked upon with suspicion Oh, and it's also their Uncle Julian survived. But the whole town thinks that the older sister, I can't remember which one's which, Constance, poisoned them. And I don't think she's ever like denied it. So we follow the other sister, and when she goes to town, she's just really like frowned upon and looked down on, and people try to avoid them at all costs. And yeah, Shirley Jackson kind of always throws in a little bit of a, oh, didn't really see that coming, which I love. Okay, I'm putting a book on here that I did not enjoy, but it's short. Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. Okay, yeah, I have not yet finished this trilogy because the books on the second one isn't super long, but the third one is significantly longer. And this is a science fiction series that I just didn't really enjoy this one, but I feel like I really want to finish it. So we follow Dr. Ransom. He is abducted by a megalomaniacal physicist and his accomplice, and they take a spaceship to a planet. It's a little strange for me, honestly, but I will finish the series eventually. Then we've got The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I read Ruth Ware's The Turn of the Key, which is like very loosely based off of this first, and it was interesting to see what she took from here. So we follow a young governess who is supposed to look after 2 children, and striving to protect the children, she becomes obsessed with the idea that they're in danger, and her good intentions cause more harm than good. Uneasy and sinister, this novella shows a woman haunted by an eerie and evil presence that emerges from the terrors of real life. Yeah, very interesting. Also kind of like got that gothic, like something's going on kind of vibe. I really enjoyed it. A kind of more fun, silly one is Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. This is the only one of his books that I've liked. So we follow, what's his name? Why am I forgetting? Phileas Fogg, as he tries to go around the world in 80 days. And I mean, a lot of people have probably watched a movie adaptation. It's a little bit out there, but I mean, it's fun if you can kind of just go with it. I packed up my nice version of this book, but I wanted to put on A Christmas Carol, and I have the nice like puffin chalk edition, but I put it away with my Christmas stuff. So I pulled this out to remind me I have a classic Christmas collection here. A Christmas Carol, another one that I feel like everyone has either watched a movie or maybe read the book, but it's really short. A Dickens that's short. I mean, you got to take advantage of that. And I feel like it's one that everyone should read at least once in their life. Some people read it every Christmas. I'm not quite that gung-ho, but it is a really good one. Next, I've got this cute little edition of Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. I don't know which Anne book I liked better. They're very different because Agnes Grey, I mean, this is tiny font, but this is a small book, whereas The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is quite thick. I think maybe I enjoyed this one more. Not really sure. But we follow a governess, and then she has like these kids that she's got to deal with that are kind of spoiled, and gets to know some other people. Super short. That's an easy one. One that I read in the fall. This was part of my literature degree, so I'm trying to read more of the early modern classics from like 1900 to 1975. So The Great Gatsby. This was an interesting read. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. I enjoyed like the lessons and stuff, not necessarily the story. I always struggle when a book is like, oh, okay, I can see what you're trying to teach us there, but also the story kind of sucks because of what you're trying to teach us. But it's a short one, easy one to check off, very popular book that most everyone had to read, especially the Americans, I feel like, had to read in school. I don't think that as Canadians it really ever is on a reading list. It wasn't for me anyway, so it felt good to read it. Another one that looks deceiving, I have The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This bind-up has other stories. In this book, the Jekyll and Hyde story is less than 70 pages, so it's way shorter than it looks here. Another one that I feel like people kind of know the story, and if you don't, I don't want to tell you because it's very interesting. Like the twist at the end if you don't know what it is, would be surprising. I went into it knowing, but it was still kind of fun. And it's such a common story that kind of comes up a lot, so I feel like everyone should read that one. Now I have two that are on my TBR shelf here. The first one is The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. This one, I don't really know what it is because I haven't read it. He imagines a place of hope, dreams, and metaphor. So he wrote this in the, what, 1945 possibly? And it takes place starting in 1999 and goes till 2026. So he kind of like is predicting the future stuff, like what was future then but is not really anymore. So I have this on my cart. I think I put it on my winter TBR. And then the other one is The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. So I talked about him in my second year DIY literature degree video as well. He is my literary mentor. So I'm trying to read a number of G.K. Chesterton books in this next year. I've only read one so far, so I'd like to get to this one soon. I've heard very conflicting things about this one. This is supposed to be a psychological thriller, which is just not something that I've read from G.K. Chesterton before, so very curious, pretty thin. So both of these are ones I would like to get to in the next little while. And then the rest was books that I have read. I would love to hear if you guys have short classics that you would recommend, ones that were good or ones that you feel like everyone should read and they're short so it's easy to check off. Leave them in the comments because I would like to add to my classics by either like continuing to look at the thrift stores or adding to them via adding Project Gutenberg free books. Always looking for some great recommendations, and it would be fun to do this again with classic books that I've read that I don't own the physical copies of, because I know there are more I could have put on here, but we got to end somewhere, got to stop at some point. So leave your comments, your recommendations below, and thanks for hanging out with me.